I stepped into my mother's 70th birthday dinner, the chandelier throwing soft light over faces I hadn't seen in 15 years. No one rose to greet me. My sister Vanessa, flawless in a crimson silk dress, lifted her wineglass and said just loud enough for everyone to hear Margaret. "I'm honestly surprised you showed up. I thought you weren't invited anymore." A few polite laughs rippled down the table. My mother wouldn't meet my eye. No one pulled out a chair. No one asked where I'd been. I stood there, hand resting on the back of an empty seat, feeling the old ache that came from being so easily erased. They didn't know that the woman they whispered about had once saved 47 lives in a place with no name on any map. They didn't know. And worse, they had never cared to find out. I took the last open chair near the swinging kitchen doors. Every time a server pushed through, warm air smelling of garlic and steam washed over me. No one at the table looked my way. Vanessa turned her back, caught up in telling some story about her new community project. She spoke with practiced excitement, her voice rising whenever someone nodded in approval. I sipped water to keep my hands from trembling. The silverware chimed softly as people reached for bread baskets and passed bottles of wine. A man across from me leaned in to whisper to his wife. Their eyes flicked to me then away as if they were embarrassed I might hear. I sat perfectly still. All around me, laughter swelled and faded. In that moment, I felt less like a guest and more like a ghost, pressing her palms against the glass, hoping someone might see her. Somewhere between the salad and the main course, I saw an old photo in a silver frame placed near the center of the table. It was from a Christmas long ago. Vanessa and I were little girls in matching elf costumes, grinning cheeks pink with cold. Her small hand rested on my shoulder. I couldn't look at it for long. The past was too close and too far all at once. A little girl wandered over, maybe 6 or 7, wearing a sparkly dress. She stared at me with wide eyes. "Are you one of Miss Vanessa's friends?" she asked, voice bright and innocent. I felt something tighten in my chest. I tried to smile but managed only a small nod. My throat was too tight for words. When she skipped away, I watched the space she'd left, wishing I could follow her into a world where I wasn't invisible. Vanessa eventually drifted back to my side, her perfume sweet and heavy. She leaned down, her lips close to my ear so no one else could hear. "You came back just in time," she whispered. "But Mom really didn't want the vibe tonight to feel overshadowed." She straightened, her smile locked back into place before she turned away. I stared at the spot she'd been standing, my heartbeat dull and slow. The words sank in like cold water, overshadowed. All I'd ever done was survive things she couldn't name. A server set a dessert plate in front of me. Chocolate cake with a perfect swirl of cream. I didn't touch it. Around me, the conversation rose again, bright and careless. My mother laughed at something the mayor said. I sat with my hands folded neatly, wondering how it was so easy for them to pretend I was nothing but a shadow at the edge of their celebration. The man across from me refilled his glass. He glanced at my untouched plate, then back at his drink. "You know," he said, his voice low, "some people thought you were still overseas." I looked up slowly. His eyes slid away before I could answer. Another woman leaned closer, her pearls glinting in the candlelight. "So, what exactly did you do in the military?" "Something with logistics, passing out supplies." Her tone was soft, almost kind, but it cut deeper than an accusation. I kept my voice calm. "No," I said. "Nothing more." The truth wouldn't fit inside the polite spaces they left for me. No one asked why I'd been gone so long. No one wondered what it cost to come home. I picked up my water again, steadying my hand, and wished someone would just say it, anything real, anything honest. To keep from shaking, I raised my wine glass and pretended to study the way the candlelight caught the dark liquid. The ripples reminded me of another place, another night. Fallujah. I saw it so clearly I almost forgot where I was. Smoke curling against shattered walls, the air thick with grit and adrenaline. I was crouched beside Marcus, pressing a bandage to his leg while bullets slammed into the building behind us. He looked at me, then eyes fierce even as he bled. "Don't you dare leave me here," he'd said. And I hadn't. A chair scraped across the floor, snapping me back to the present. The table was clinking with silverware again. Soft laughter rose, too clean, too easy. I lowered my glass, the memory fading like a ghost that wouldn't leave. From the far end of the table, Vanessa's voice lifted smooth and practiced. She stood now, one hand resting lightly on the mayor's shoulder. She spoke about Magnolia Forward, her new community project, how it would bring jobs, pride, and purpose to their little town. Her words flowed like silk. People leaned in, nodding, impressed by her vision, her poise, her charm. I watched as she gestured toward the future she was building. I watched as no one thought to glance my way. The applause came easily, polite and warm. Vanessa beamed, soaking in their approval, her head held high like she'd earned it on some kind of battlefield. And I sat there, still as stone, invisible, at my own mother's table. They didn't see the soldier who came home, only the sister who didn't fit into the story they liked to tell. When the clapping faded, my mother rose to speak. She lifted her glass and smiled, her voice steady as she listed her blessings. Vanessa's thriving project, Brian's acceptance to medical school, the youngest grandchild's spelling bee trophy. Each name, each achievement layered neatly on top of the last. Not once did she say mine. I waited for it, even knowing better. Waited for the moment she might look my way, might remember. But her gaze drifted past me as if I were an empty seat. People murmured their congratulations. Someone called for another toast. I felt my face go hot. My hands stayed folded in my lap. In that bright, crowded room, I understood something simple and brutal. It wasn't that they had forgotten me. It was that they had decided long ago I wasn't worth remembering. When everyone settled back into their chairs, an older woman I barely recognized leaned across the table. She squinted at me over her bifocals, her bracelets clinking softly. "And what do you do now, dear?" she asked, her voice too sweet. Still, whatever it was you did in the military, I let out a slow breath, steadying my tone. "No," I said, "not anymore." Her eyes searched my face for something, an explanation, an apology. I offered neither. She nodded like that was all she needed to hear, then turned away to refill her glass. I stared at the folds of the white tablecloth, the flicker of the candles, the smiles passing over me without pause. I felt the memory of Fallujah tightening in my chest, pressing against every word I refused to say. Some truths didn't belong in rooms like this. I sat through the rest of dinner in silence. The plates came and went, steak, potatoes, desserts, so carefully arranged it felt like an insult. Every now and then, someone glanced in my direction, their eyes sliding away before they could land. Vanessa never looked at me again. I studied her as she posed for photos beside the mayor and a man in a tailored suit I didn't recognize. Their smiles were perfect, framed by the soft glow of candles and the clink of expensive glassware. I felt like I was watching a play I hadn't been invited to join. I wondered how it was possible to sit inches from your own family and feel like you'd never belonged there at all. When the check arrived, no one asked if I would stay longer, so I stood, smoothed the front of my dress, and walked out without saying goodbye. The next morning, I woke in a motel room that smelled of bleach and stale air. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, catching on the faded carpet and my unpacked bag by the door. No one had offered me a place to stay, not even out of politeness. My phone lit up with a single message from my father. "Thanks for coming. Your mother's tired. Not up for visitors." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I set the phone face down on the nightstand. Silence settled over me, heavy and certain. It hurt more than any argument could have. I made a cup of motel coffee, bitter and thin, and sat on the edge of the bed. Last night clung to me, all the things unsaid, pressing against my skin like bruises I couldn't hide. I left the motel with no real plan, just the need to breathe air that didn't taste like disappointment. Magnolia Ridge was too small for wandering. You always ended up somewhere familiar. I walked past the old courthouse, the diner where my parents had first met, the pharmacy where I'd worked one summer before college. Each place felt unchanged, like the town had kept moving without ever moving on. My feet carried me down Main Street until I stopped in front of a brick building with gold letters on the glass. The gold thread. Vanessa's Boutique. In the window, a giant poster showed her in a dark blue uniform dress, brass buttons gleaming. She was smiling, one hand over her heart. Beneath the photo, the tagline read, "From family legacy to civic duty." I felt something in me go very still. I stepped closer to the glass, studying every detail. The uniform she wore wasn't real. It looked almost official, but the cut was wrong. The medals arranged like props. My eyes caught on the bronze star pinned to her chest. It wasn't a replica. It was the decommissioned design, the flawed badge that had been pulled from circulation years ago. No civilian should have owned it, let alone worn it in a photo shoot. The caption beneath her face felt like a slap. Family legacy. I thought of Marcus, of Fallujah, of everything I'd given up just to come home to this. For a moment, I wanted to go inside and rip the poster down with my bare hands. Instead, I turned away, my pulse hammering in my throat, and walked 2 blocks without stopping. I found myself standing in front of the bookstore my father still owned. The bell above the door gave the same soft chime it always had when I stepped inside. Dust hung in the shafts of light from the front windows, swirling in slow circles. Nothing had changed, not the creaky floorboards or the faded rug near the counter. On the desk, I saw a framed document propped up like a trophy. I picked it up carefully. It was a military file with my name across the top. Margaret Hayes, Logistics Division, Reserve, Non-Combatant Classification. I let out a quiet laugh, more disbelief than humor. It wasn't even a good fake. I had never served in logistics, never spent a day in reserve status. I was still holding it when I heard my father's footsteps behind me. He stopped in the doorway, his hands buried in the pockets of his old cardigan. For a moment he didn't say anything, just looked at the frame in my hand. I turned to face him, my voice flat. "Why would you display this?" He cleared his throat, eyes fixed on the floor. "Your mother, she didn't want people to think of you as someone who killed people. You know how she is. Vanessa fits the mold. She's easier for folks to understand." I felt something crack behind my ribs, slow and silent. "For the family," he added, softer now. I repeated the words under my breath. "For the family." The bookstore felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were leaning in. I slipped the fake report out of its frame, folded it once, and put it in my pocket. He didn't try to stop me. I stepped outside, the morning sun too bright for how cold I felt. For a moment, I just stood there on the sidewalk, breathing in the quiet. Nothing about this town looked different. Same brick buildings, same cracked sidewalks, same people who had decided long ago which parts of me were acceptable to remember. I thought about the poster in Vanessa's window, the file on my father's desk, the careful way they'd rewritten my story to make it easier to swallow. It wasn't that they misunderstood who I was. It was that they preferred a version of me that never really existed. I walked down the block, each step heavier than the last. I knew then that I couldn't stay quiet anymore. If they were going to invent a story about me, I would make sure they heard the truth, even if it cost me everything. I didn't plan to go to Vanessa's fundraiser. After the poster and the file, I'd had enough polite lies to last me the rest of my life. But that night, sitting in the motel room with the fake report on the table, I felt something sharp and restless inside me. I needed to see what she would do next. I needed to look her in the eye and know for certain how far she'd go to protect her story. So I put on the same plain navy dress I'd worn to my mother's dinner and drove across town to the country club. The parking lot was full. Strings of white lights glowed along the roofline. I took a deep breath before walking inside. Whatever waited for me beyond those doors, I knew one thing: I wasn't there to disappear this time. Inside, everything smelled like polished wood and expensive catering. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead and a jazz quartet played near the stage. A young woman at the check-in table smiled too brightly when I gave her my name. "Of course," she said. "You're at table 14. She pointed toward the far side of the ballroom. I walked past rows of linen-covered tables until I found mine. It was tucked between the restroom doors and the service station, half hidden by a potted ficus. 2 people already sat there, a man swirling bourbon in his glass and a woman who never looked up from her phone. I slid into my seat without a word. From here, I couldn't even see the stage. But I didn't move. If they wanted me in the shadows, fine. I'd watch everything from the dark. Halfway through the evening, the lights dimmed. Vanessa stepped onto the stage, a microphone in her hand, her emerald dress catching every spotlight. She looked composed, her smile wide and practiced. She began to speak about resilience, innovation, and the power of community. Her voice carried easily over the music and the clinking glasses. I sat very still, listening to every polished sentence. Then her tone softened, turned almost tender. "My family," she said, "has been marked by complicated legacies. My sister once served, but the pressures of combat were understandably difficult." She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. People shifted in their seats, a few casting curious glances my way. In that moment, I realized she wasn't just telling her story. She was rewriting mine so she could stand there unchallenged. When the applause started, I slipped quietly from my chair. I moved toward the back hall, needing a moment where no one could see me. Near the catering door, I paused. Voices drifted through the narrow gap. Vanessa's voice low but clear. She never defends herself. She just absorbs it. Which is perfect, really. If Crane ever needs proof, I still have that old letter. A man answered, voice smooth and certain. The one she wrote after Fallujah, that should be enough to show she isn't as clean as people think. My heart thudded hard against my ribs. I knew exactly which letter they meant. The one I'd written in a hospital bed explaining why I declined a promotion to protect Marcus Reed from an inquiry. I pressed my palm to the wall, steadying my breath. They were willing to use anything, even that, to keep their version of the story alive. I left the country club without speaking to anyone. The night air felt too thin, the parking lot too bright. Every step to my car felt heavier than the last. When I reached my motel room, I locked the door and sank onto the edge of the bed. My hands were still shaking. I opened the old deployment trunk I hadn't touched in years. Inside, under folded uniforms and yellowed papers, was a small leather pouch. I pulled it out and set it on the blanket. The gold eagle pin Marcus had given me rested inside. I turned it over in my palm, remembering the last time I'd seen his face. If anything happens to me, check the pin, he'd said. I traced the edges with my thumb, feeling for something I might have missed. My pulse climbed as I found the faintest seam along the back. I took a small penknife from the nightstand and worked it into the seam. The back of the pin lifted with a soft click. Inside was a micro SD card no bigger than my thumbnail. I held it between my fingers, breathing slow, steady. It had been there all this time, tucked inside something I almost forgot I owned. I set my laptop on the table and plugged the card into the port. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a folder appeared on the screen, dust line, confidential. My throat tightened. I clicked it open. 3 audio files waited in the list. I closed my eyes, bracing for whatever I was about to hear. When I pressed play on the first recording, Marcus's voice filled the room, calm, clipped, unflinching. "The manifest says medical supplies," Marcus said. His tone was edged with quiet anger. "You and I both know those crates are packed with intercept-grade ordnance. You move it out before the UN sweep. No questions." A second voice, rough and dismissive, replied, "You're not paid to think, Reed. You're paid to deliver." I swallowed hard, the air in the room seeming to thin around me. The file ended with a burst of static. My hands hovered over the trackpad before I clicked the second recording. Marcus again, sharper now. "You're going to get civilians killed," he said. "You think I won't report this?" Another silence. Then the same man, colder. "Think carefully before you open your mouth." I closed the laptop for a moment, pressing my palms over my eyes. It felt like Marcus was still here, daring me to finish what he couldn't. I opened the laptop again and clicked on the last file. Marcus's voice came through quieter this time, like he was speaking from the edge of something he couldn't name. "If I go missing, if they say it was an accident, tell Hayes she'll know what to do." His breath caught a soft hitch I'd heard once in the field when he was trying not to pass out. "She's the only one I trust to tell the truth." Then silence. I sat back in the chair, my chest tight, the words echoing in my ears. All these years I thought I'd failed him by surviving, but he hadn't left me with nothing. He'd left me a way to finish the fight. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, and I knew, with a certainty that settled into my bones, I couldn't walk away again. I copied all 3 recordings to a secure drive. Then I printed the transcripts, each page trembling slightly as it fed through the motel's old printer. When the last sheet landed on the stack, I sat staring at them, my hands flat on the table. This was bigger than a family lie, bigger than any shame they tried to hang around my neck. I gathered the papers into a folder and wrote one line on the cover. "For truth, not glory." Sliding it into an envelope, I addressed it to Nolan Graves, the journalist I'd seen at Vanessa's event. He was known for chasing stories no one else would touch. I sealed the flap, pressing it closed with my palm. Then I looked over at the gold eagle pin on the bedspread. I wasn't finished. I had one more place to stand and one more story to tell. At dawn, I brewed the last packet of motel coffee and watched the sky turn from gray to pale blue. The envelope to Nolan sat by the door ready. My phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Harrow. "National Veterans Conference. Houston. 3 days. You should be there. I read it twice. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the recordings speak for themselves and stay hidden behind the quiet life I'd tried to build. But Marcus's voice stayed with me. She'll know what to do. I set my cup down, the taste bitter on my tongue. I didn't have the luxury of staying invisible anymore. If I showed up, everything I'd buried would surface. But maybe that was the point. I packed my bag and slid the pin into my pocket. This time, I wasn't going to flinch. The highway stretched out in front of me, flat and endless. My hand stayed steady on the wheel, though my heart wasn't as calm. Mile after mile, I thought about all the ways the story could break apart. How Vanessa would spin it, how Crane would deny it, how my family would pretend it wasn't happening, but none of that mattered more than the truth. At a gas station outside San Antonio, I pulled over and checked the envelope again. Still there, still waiting. I thought about Marcus, how he'd looked that last night, before the mission, exhausted but sure. I pressed my palm to the pocket where I'd hidden the pin. His faith in me was the only permission I needed. When I started the car again, I felt something shift. Like for the first time in years, I was driving toward who I was supposed to be. The convention center was already crowded when I arrived. Flags lined the entrance, snapping in the wind. Reporters clustered near the doors, their cameras trained on anyone in uniform. I kept my head down as I walked past them, my badge clipped to the strap of my bag. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and polished floors. Veterans stood in small groups, talking in low voices that carried the weight of shared history. I found a quiet corner near the back wall and sat the folder resting on my knees. On the main stage, someone was rehearsing introductions, their voice echoing through the speakers. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the noise fade. When I opened them again, I knew exactly why I was here. Not to clear my name, to make sure Marcus's didn't disappear. Colonel Harrow found me just before the doors opened to the public. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were the same sharp, steady. He didn't waste time on small talk. "You ready?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, though my throat was tight. He studied my face for a long second. "If you back out now, they'll think you're guilty," he said. I took a slow breath. "I'm not here to defend myself," I told him. "I know," he said, "but you should be ready for them to make it personal." I glanced down at the folder in my hands. "For Marcus," I said softly. He placed a hand on my shoulder, heavy with understanding. Then he stepped aside so I could walk past him. Toward the stage, toward the moment I stopped being silent. The lights hit me as soon as I stepped onto the platform. Rows of chairs stretched into the shadows, every seat filled. Faces turned up expectant, some curious, some already judging. I set the folder on the podium and took a breath that felt too big for my lungs. When I spoke, my voice was steadier than I felt. "I used to think honor was something other people decided you had," I began. "But war teaches you different. Honor is what you keep when no one else believes you deserve it." A hush settled over the room. I pressed a button and the screens behind me flickered to life. Images of Fallujah filled the space smoke, rebel soldiers dragging civilians to safety. And Marcus, frozen in a single frame, his eyes locked on something just beyond the camera. I swallowed hard. "He didn't die for a lie," I said. I lifted the secure drive from my pocket, my fingers steady. "When I left the service, I thought silence would protect what little I had left," I said. "But silence only protects the people who deserve it least." I plugged the drive into the podium's console. A moment later, Marcus's voice filled the auditorium. "The manifest says medical supplies. You and I both know it's ordnance." I watched the crowd as they listened. Some leaned forward, expressions tight. Others shook their heads, disbelief or shame I couldn't tell. The second recording played sharper, angrier. "You're going to get civilians killed. You think I won't report this?" A murmur rippled through the seats. When the third recording ended, "She'll know what to do." I looked up and met their eyes. "For years I thought I failed him," I said quietly. "Today I'm here to finish what he started." For a long moment, no one moved. Then a man in dress uniform stepped up beside me. His medals caught the light, a silent testament to battles fought. He faced the audience, voice firm but even. "These recordings have been authenticated by military intelligence," he said. "They document an illegal arms operation that led to civilian deaths and the loss of Sergeant Marcus Reed. Gasps broke across the room. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with both hands. The officer continued, "Major Hayes is not under investigation. She is a protected witness under federal statute." I felt my shoulders lower, an invisible weight slipping free. But the relief didn't taste like victory. It tasted like something harder, truth finally spoken aloud. I looked at the screen, Marcus's face frozen in grainy pixels. "You did it," I thought. "We did." Someone started clapping, a single pair of hands in the back row, slow and deliberate. Then others joined in the sound building until it filled the hall. I didn't smile. Applause wasn't why I came, but as the crowd stood, I felt something settle inside me, something that had been raw for years. A reporter stepped forward, microphone raised. "Major Hayes," she called out, her voice careful. "What do you say to the people who called you a coward for surviving?" I met her eyes without flinching. "I survived," I said, "and I've used that survival to say what the dead can't." The clapping grew louder, though my heartbeat stayed slow and even. I stepped back from the podium, my palms open at my sides. In that moment, I knew this wasn't the end. But it was the first time the truth stood taller than the lies. I left the stage as the crowd kept clapping. The hallway behind the curtains felt cooler, almost quiet. Colonel Harrow waited there, his expression softer than I'd ever seen. "You did it," he said simply. I nodded, unable to speak for a second. He pressed something into my hand, a folded piece of paper. "Media contacts," he said. "People who won't bury this." I tucked it into my pocket without looking. Down the corridor, I saw a reporter already on her phone, probably calling in the headline. I thought about Vanessa, about Crane, about the years they spent making sure my name was just a footnote. Not anymore. When I stepped outside, the air was bright with early afternoon sun, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had nothing left to hide. I sat on a low concrete wall outside the convention center, my bag beside me. My phone buzzed in my hand. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it, but I answered. My mother's voice came through thin and uncertain. "Margaret," she began, I saw the broadcast." I said nothing, letting the silence do what words couldn't. Her breath hitched. "I didn't understand," she whispered. "I didn't want to. It was easier to pretend you were just gone." A gull cried overhead, cutting through the pause. "I know," I said quietly. Her voice broke. "I'm sorry." I closed my eyes, feeling something shift, slow and fragile. "I know," I repeated. Neither of us hung up. We just sat there, miles apart, listening to each other breathe like it was the closest thing to forgiveness we could manage. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Vanessa. Her message was short. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. I sat on the motel bed, the envelope to Nolan still resting on the table, the gold eagle pin beside it. Finally, I typed back. "Where?" She replied almost instantly. "The cafe near Main Street? Tomorrow morning." I set the phone down and rubbed my palms over my face. I didn't know what she wanted, an apology, a confession, a way to rewrite the damage. But I knew I had to hear it, not for her sake, for mine. Whatever she was going to say, I wanted to look her in the eye when she said it. The next morning, I found Vanessa already waiting at a corner table. She looked smaller without an audience, no cameras, no stage, just her clutching a mug she hadn't touched. When I sat down, she lifted her eyes, red-rimmed and tired. "I didn't know they'd use the letter," she said softly. "I thought it was just a background check. They promised it wouldn't go public." Her voice cracked. "I needed the funding, Margaret. I thought if I could get it, maybe Mom would finally look at me the way she looks at you." I didn't interrupt. She wiped at her face, breath shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I leaned back in my chair, feeling something uncoil inside me. "I know," I said. And for the first time, I almost believed it. That afternoon, I drove out past the edge of town. The cemetery was quiet, the grass trimmed neat around rows of white stones. I walked to Marcus's grave, the gold eagle pin in my hand. A small bouquet of fresh daisies rested against the headstone. Someone else had remembered him too. I crouched down, pressing my palm to the cool marble. "They tried to bury you," I said softly, "and they tried to bury me." I set the pin at the base of the marker. But we're still here. Wind moved through the trees overhead, carrying the faint scent of pine. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying him alone. I stood brushing dirt from my knees. As I turned to leave, I felt something lift, a quiet knowing that the story had finally come home. 3 months later, I stood in front of the new Veterans Resource Center. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows across the fresh brick walls. A brass plaque gleamed beside the entrance, the Marcus Reed Center for Truth and Service. People gathered in small clusters, veterans, families, reporters. I wore my uniform, the one they'd tried to erase from every record. Beside me, a little girl held a framed photo of Marcus. Her mother watched her with quiet pride. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped to the microphone, my voice steady. This place is here because one man believed doing the right thing mattered more than being remembered for it. I looked out at the crowd, letting the silence stretch. And because sometimes survival isn't enough. Sometimes you have to stand up and speak. The applause was soft at first, then it grew. After the ceremony ended, people drifted away in pairs and small groups. I stayed behind watching the morning lights spill across the steps. Vanessa approached slowly, no camera in sight. She didn't try to smile. Instead, she just said, "Thank you for not leaving me behind." I studied her face, the edges worn down by everything we'd both lost. "You pulled yourself out," I said. "That counts for something." We stood there a moment longer, the quiet settling between us like a truce. Then she turned and walked back toward the parking lot. I faced the plaque one more time, tracing Marcus's name with my fingertip. When I finally stepped away, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, some damage never heals clean, but because I knew the truth was out where it belonged. If this story meant something to you, share it. Sometimes knowing someone is listening makes all the difference. If this story has stayed with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share what it made you remember or what it helped you feel. And if you'd like to keep walking beside stories that honor truth and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Your presence here means more than you know.